Welcome to our general overview workshop for the round 1 draft guidelines for the Regional Resilience Grant Program. I'm Dolores Barajas. I'm the program manager for this program. And the Regional Resilience Grant Program is a new program from the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program, also known as ICARP, which is housed in the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. And we're so glad that you've joined us to learn more about the guidelines and share your input. We'd also like to let you know that we are recording this meeting, the general overview session for our workshop series, and we will post it online. We won't be able to record breakout rooms. And to get us started, we'd ask that you please share a little bit about yourself in the chat. If you could introduce yourself and your name, title, organization, where you're joining us from, so that we can all kind of get an idea of who's in the room. And before we start, sorry, go ahead with someone going to jump in. Okay. Before we start, I'd like to introduce our team to you. As I mentioned, I'm Dolores Barajas, the program manager, and I'll turn it over to Lauren.
Hi, my name is Lauren Marcelia. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the senior planner.
Hi, all. My name is Kristen Vega Payne, and I'm the associate planner.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Lyons. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the assistant planner. Back to you, Dolores.
Great, thank you. And we also have our colleagues, Jess McCool, Dora Monterosa, and Jessica Cervantes from the Strategic Growth Council that are supporting us today in various roles. So thank you all for joining us. Next slide, please. So here's an overview of what we'll be discussing today. First, we'll give you a background of our program and review the program's timeline. Then we'll share highlights from the engagement we conducted that informed these draft guidelines. And after that, we'll dive into specifics on the round 1 draft guidelines, which you can review through the link in the chat. The presentation on the program and guidelines will take us about 30 minutes, and then we'll dedicate about 45 minutes to a question and answer session. We'll move into 2 breakout rooms for the Q&A session to allow for more time and space to hear from all of you during our discussion. And we'll close out with a quick recap and share other resources. We'll also share the slides after this workshop via email. And in the coming week, we'll post slides and the recording of this workshop only on the Regional Resilience website. Next slide, please. So now I'll turn it over to Lauren to start our program overview.
Thanks, Dolores. This workshop is the first in a series of workshops we'll hold to share our draft guidelines and invite public comments. During today's presentation, we'll provide a general overview of the draft guidelines. And starting next week from January 30th through the end of February, we'll hold 5 more workshops on the draft guidelines that'll have a regional or community focus. We encourage you to attend the sessions for your region or community and share the opportunity to provide public comment with your network. We also want to make sure that we hear from a wide array of opinions on how we can further develop these guidelines to meet regional resilience needs. These sessions are a great opportunity to see which entities in your region are interested in the program. And it's also a place for everyone to discuss region or community specific comments and shed light on potential opportunities to collaborate. Next slide, please. So all public comments on the draft guidelines are due by March 3rd at 5 p.m. Pacific time. You can submit comments on the draft guidelines by either attending a public workshop or emailing comments to the ICARP grants email shown on the slide. That's icarp.grants@opr.ca.gov. To register for a public workshop, you can visit our website, which is linked in the chat. Next slide, please. The Regional Resilience Grant Program, which we'll sometimes refer to as RRGP throughout the workshop, aims to support local, regional, and tribal entities' regional scale climate resilience solutions. The program will target funding towards capacity building, planning, and project implementation. The program will fund projects in either the planning or implementation category. We encourage applicants in both categories, either planning or implementation, to incorporate capacity building into their projects. In round one, $21.3 million will be available. At least 12.5 million of those dollars will be awarded to planning activities to support the full life cycle of regional resilience projects through the planning and implementation phases. And future rounds of the program will only include project implementation funds. Next slide, please. So just for more background on the program, this slide shows ICARP's definitions of climate resilience and climate adaptation, just so everyone knows what we mean when we mention those terms. ICARP defines climate resilience as the capacity of any entity to prepare for disruptions, recover from shocks and stresses, and adapt and grow from a disruption. Alternatively, ICARP defines climate adaptation as the process of natural or human systems adjusting to a new or changing environment. Next slide, please. This slide just shows an overview of the different grant programs that ICARP offers. Our program is one of 3 new grant programs that ICARP is developing as authorized in the 2021 state climate budget that funds local, regional, and tribal climate adaptation and resilience efforts across the state. ICARP's grant programs include this program, the Regional Resilience Grant Program, or RRGP, the Adaptation Planning Grant Program, or APGP, which just released its application and solicitation, and the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program, which is still in the early stages of program planning. If you want to learn more about these 3 programs, you can visit the ICARP grants website, which Kate just linked in the chat. Next slide, please. The Regional Resilience Grant Program is oriented around the priorities listed here. The program's distinguishing feature is its regional focus. We'll touch on how the program defines regions a little bit later in the presentation. The program aims to fund regional projects that align with ICARP's priorities, including protecting critical infrastructure and building a community's capacity to respond to climate change, as well as implementing solutions that are consistent with the California Climate Adaptation Strategy priorities. This program also aims to address the greatest climate risks in each region with a strong emphasis on supporting vulnerable communities. Next slide, please. This program aims to fill a need for collaborative resilience projects that reduce climate impacts both in the near and long term. The funded projects will strengthen existing collaborations or forge new ones, all while integrating local and traditional or tribal ecological knowledge wherever possible. RRGP prioritizes projects at all points in the resilience planning lifecycle, from planned projects to shovel-ready projects or projects that are just an idea. The program intends to support grantees to integrate capacity building into the process while focusing on vulnerable communities and supporting equitable outcomes. Next slide. This slide shows a tentative timeline for our program. Over the past year, we've been working on our first round of funding. Last year, staff conducted a series of listening sessions, and we'll share the main takeaways from those sessions in a moment. After the listening sessions, staff incorporated feedback into the draft guidelines, which we completed and released on January 17th, last Tuesday. Staff are currently facilitating a series of public comment workshops and inviting public comments through mail. After the public comment period, we'll review and incorporate the comments and release the finalized guidelines in April. Applicants will have about 90 days to apply, and we'll offer technical assistance workshops throughout the application period. In the fall of 2023, that's when we plan to announce the awards. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kristen, who will share the feedback we heard on the program and start reviewing the elements of our draft guidelines.
Thanks, Lauren, and hello, everyone. Last summer, we held a series of public listening sessions, key informant interviews, and posted an online survey to inform the development of the Regional Resilience Grant Program. Our program engagement summary, which you can find linked in the chat, summarizes the feedback we received during this process. A total of 140 organizations were engaged through this process. Next slide, please. So 3 pieces of feedback stood out from our engagement process. First, folks asked that the program allow applicants to self-identify which region their project serves. Comments indicated that a flexible definition would support a diversity of needs across the state. Second, feedback highlighted the importance of funding sustainable staffing and strategic partnerships to not only work towards resilience, but also build capacity at the regional scale. Participants really emphasized the need to support collaboration amongst multiple levels of government to form multi-scale partnerships that prioritize the needs of each region's most vulnerable communities. Finally, feedback highlighted the need to streamline and simplify the grant application and reporting processes to increase accessibility and minimize the amount of work that goes into applying and reporting. To support this, participants requested technical assistance and aligning with other grant programs. Next slide, please. We incorporated the feedback we heard into various regional components of the program. The draft guidelines provide flexibility for applicants to define what region their project serves. The guidelines also offer guidance on how applicants should think about regions, including considering shared systems of natural and built environment and shared climate risks. The program requires regional partnerships and at least one lead applicant and a co-applicant. Projects should serve a regional scale, which we define as larger than a single jurisdiction. Ideally, diverse cross-jurisdictional partnerships that engage with and coordinate amongst multiple levels of government and community will support the projects. Our funding goals try to encourage a regional diversity of projects by aiming to fund at least one project from each of the 9 California Climate Adaptation Strategy regions. Throughout this workshop, we'll release some Zoom polls to hear about your thoughts on different elements of the guidelines. Here's a test Zoom poll question to help navigate the Zoom poll format. It asks, what is your favorite meal of the day? And provides the options of breakfast, lunch, dinner, or dessert. Just a heads up, we won't be releasing your answers to these polls. We also welcome feedback on all of the poll questions during the breakout room Q&A sessions. I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. And let's share the results just to be fun. Breakfast wins. Oh, dinner wins. Okay, so now we'll release our first Zoom poll to hear about your thoughts on this flexible regional definition. The question reads, the flexible regional definition supports my needs as a potential applicant. The options are supportive, neutral, not supportive, or not applicable, or not a potential applicant. Please take a moment to fill this out. Okay, thank you for filling out the poll. Next slide, please. We'll start our overview of the guidelines with requirements for applicants. On the left, you'll see that eligible applicants for the program include public entities, California Native American tribes, and community-based organizations. Organizations associated with the California Native American tribes are categorized as community-based organizations. On the right, we've detailed the program's requirements for co-applicants and partnership. As I mentioned on the previous slide, each project application must include one lead applicant and one co-applicant. At least one of the applicants for a project must be a public entity or a California Native American tribe. If a public entity applies and plans to focus its project on vulnerable communities, they must partner with at least one CBO to better ensure that they consider and integrate those vulnerable communities' needs into their project. We're about to release another Zoom poll to hear what you think about applicant requirements. Please take a moment to fill out this question. The question reads, my organization will be able to find co-applicants for my potential project. You can choose from agree, neutral, disagree, and not applicable or not a potential applicant. I'll give you a moment to fill that out. We appreciate your answers. Okay, thank you for answering. We have another question launching now. The question reads, the applicant definition and partnership models are clear to me. You can choose from agree, neutral, disagree, and not applicable or not a potential applicant. Great. Thank you so much for your feedback. We appreciate all these responses. Next slide, please. The program's implementing legislation, SB 170, requires RRGP to have formula funding, which we refer to as set-aside goals. Staff incorporated set-aside goals that target funding toward priority communities into the draft guidelines. The set-asides including allotting at least 25% of funds to projects that focus on disadvantaged communities and at least 10% of funds to projects that focus on California Native American tribes. The program uses CalEnviroScreen to define disadvantaged communities. To ensure geographic diversity of funding allocation, the program also aims to fund at least one project from each of the 9 geographic regions in the California Climate Adaptation Strategy. While applicants are not required to use the California Climate Adaptation Strategy regions, these regions provide an ICARP standard to ensure geographic diversity. Finally, the program aims to fund at least 2 projects to establish tribal and regional partnerships. And here comes another Zoom poll. We'd love to hear your initial thoughts on the guidelines approach to priority communities and funding goals. Please take a moment to fill out the poll. The poll reads, if your potential project involves priority communities listed here, do these funding goals help to support your needs? The options are supportive, neutral, not supportive, or NA or not a potential applicant. Also, as a reminder, you can provide further feedback during the breakout room sessions on the questions that we're asking here. Wonderful. Thank you for responding to the poll. Next slide, please. Throughout the grant application phase, staff will provide technical assistance to grantees. Unfortunately, third-party technical assistance is not available for grantees for the first round of the program. Technical assistance will include online application workshops, online office hours, information sharing to foster potential collaboration, and posting frequently asked questions on the RRGP website. We'll hold 5 virtual technical assistance workshops throughout the application period, including 2 general workshops, 1 tribal government-oriented workshop, 1 workshop for Southern regions, and 1 workshop for Northern regions. Next slide, please. I'll pass it off to Kate now to continue sharing aspects of our guidelines.
Thanks, Kristen. So grants will be awarded to both planning and implementation projects in the first round. Applicants anywhere in the resilience planning continuum, whether just beginning a vulnerability assessment or implementing a resilience project, are encouraged to apply for the grant program. Projects should have a regional focus, consider vulnerable communities, and align with at least one of the RRGP goals Lauren mentioned earlier in the presentation. Stronger proposals will also be consistent with at least 1 climate-related state plan, address at least 2 climate risks, and offer multiple co-benefits. A wide range of projects are eligible for this program. Our implementing legislation, SB 170, specifically calls out wildfire, sea level rise, drought, flood, extreme heat, and energy resilience projects. OPR cannot fund activities that include legislative lobbying or lawsuits. At this time, OPR also cannot fund environmental studies, plans, or documents normally required for project development under CEQA or NEPA. Next slide, please. So here we've compiled some examples of planning and implementation activities that would be eligible for the program. Planning activities could include typical resilience planning and capacity building activities, such as conducting a regional scale vulnerability assessment, forming a collaborative, aligning plans, or starting an education initiative. Implementation projects could include implementing resilience planning documents, hazard-specific projects, or multi-hazard projects. For both planning and implementation projects, we encourage collaboration with CBOs and or tribes, as well as multiple levels of government. This list is certainly not exhaustive, and the guidelines are intentionally general to allow for many possibilities. More project examples are available in Appendix B of our draft guidelines. The Adaptation Clearinghouse, linked in the chat, also offers more resources that may support your project, including case studies, plan alignment guides, and data. The Case Studies tab specifically might help spark ideas about creative projects for your region. You can also use the resources by topic tab to browse resources by your region's specific climate risk. And now we're going to go ahead and release another Zoom poll to hear about your initial thoughts about eligible activities. So the poll reads, if you are a potential applicant, do you have a specific project in mind to apply for the grant program? And you can select multiple responses. The choices are maybe you have a potential planning project or an existing planning project, or a potential implementation project or an existing implementation project, or maybe you don't have a project in mind. So select all that apply to you. Or you can choose NA if you are not a potential applicant. Thank you so much for your responses. All right, next slide, please. So before applying, applicants should complete an intent to apply survey, which will be available online prior to our solicitation release. The intent to apply survey will help staff evaluate applicant eligibility and potential for regional collaboration or other funding opportunities, and will also help direct resources for technical support. Next slide, please. A review panel will evaluate applications for this program on a competitive basis. Applicants will virtually submit applications through a SharePoint grants portal. Applicant questions will closely align with topical areas in the scoring criteria section of the guidelines. The application asks for additional documentation for different application components, including a budget, work plan, community engagement plan, as well as letters of support from communities that the project aims to support. In response to the feedback that we received through our engagement process and feedback received for the Adaptation Planning Grant Program, or APGP, the application process for this program looks similar to the Adaptation Planning Grant Program, including the use of the SharePoint Grants portal and the intent to apply survey. We're releasing another Zoom poll now to gauge your initial thoughts on the application process. Please take a moment to respond. The poll prompt is, this application model supports my needs as a potential applicant for a streamlined application process. And you can choose supportive, neutral, not supportive, or not applicable or not a potential applicant. Thank you so much for your responses to these polls. And we'll move to the next slide. So this slide is detailing some of the scoring criteria for applications received through this program. You can see that the community needs and priorities component carries the heaviest weight, contributing 20 points to the overall 100 points possible. Then the consistency with RRGP, state priorities and local plans component, the climate risk and co-benefits component, the regional partnership component, and the budget component are each attributed 15 points. The proposed project description and goals category and the organizational capacity category both carry 10 points to make up the total 100 points. Next slide, please. For both planning and implementation projects, grantees and their partners should develop an action plan at the beginning of their grant term. The action plan will identify the project's key activities, member roles and responsibilities, and timelines. The action plan should build on the work plan and community partnership plan, which are both components of the application. The action plan should help guide project implementation and hold partners accountable to one another and the community around project activities and outcomes. Grantees will also be expected to monitor their project impact and evaluate how their project aligns with the program objectives throughout the grant term. A major goal of evaluation will really be to ensure that community partnerships meaningfully serve vulnerable communities. Evaluation will consist of progress reports as well as regular check-ins. Program staff and technical assistance providers will help develop evaluation plans and assess progress throughout the grant term. We're about to launch the final Zoom poll of the workshop of this session, so please take a moment to respond. This question is about the scoring criteria and program expectations, and it reads, the scoring criteria and program expectations support my needs as a potential applicant for strategic partnerships and capacity building. You can choose from agree, neutral, disagree, or NA or not a potential applicant. Great, thank you so much for your responses. And we'll end that poll. As another reminder, we'd love to discuss your answers to all of these questions in further detail when we move to breakout rooms. Next slide, please. So applicants should ensure that the costs proposed in the budget section of their application comply with the list of eligible funding activities in the guidelines. In the guidelines, eligible costs are separated into two groups. One group holds eligible costs for both planning and implementation projects, and then activities that are only eligible costs for implementation projects are pulled into a separate category. This list provides a glimpse at the list of eligible costs. More information is available in the guidelines on page 25. So now that we've reviewed the major components of the guidelines, we're going to open some breakout rooms to provide a space for everyone to provide comments and tell us what you think. So Kristen, if you could stop recording, and then Jess, if we.
Great. So before we close out with next steps and resources, wanted to allow some space for hearing what happened in each of the breakout rooms. So Kate, would you please share main takeaways, and then we can alternate. Sorry if I have the breakout room swapped.
Yeah, sounds great. So in our breakout room, we discussed a few interesting questions. So one of the first questions was about submitting multiple applications or just one per agency. So the person who asked the question was wondering for two separate projects, one was a microgrid project and one was a pump station project, whether they could submit applications for both of those projects. And we just were talking about that for two different projects, that sounds like it could be, yeah, possible for two separate applications, but just reinforcing the narrative that we would just want to see that you're partnering with at a regional scale, and that the projects have a regional aspect, and that you're also partnering with another agency. So yeah, with questions like that, just feel free to reach out to us and we can talk about whether projects would be a good fit for our program, and if not, support you in finding a good fit. So that was a good question. Another question was about whether the next regional and community-based workshops would be different from this workshop. So the presentation will be mostly the same, except for we will share some region-specific background from our engagement and what feedback we got from the region specifically. And then also the breakout room or the discussion question section will be a good opportunity for you to see who else in your region is interested in the program and get a sense of who might be good to partner on projects with. So that could be an advantage of attending some of our regional sessions. And then I'll touch on one other question. So we did get a question about the grant term and when funds have to be spent. So projects can be 12 to 30 months long. So the longest it can go is until May of 2026, with the final invoice date in June of 2026. So keeping that in mind for your applications, and that all of that information is also available in the guidelines. But yeah, thank you to Breakout Room 1 for great questions and discussion.
Great, thank you. Kristen, do you want to touch on what our breakout session discussed?
Yes, I'll just give a broad overview. We'll also be incorporating some of these questions into our frequently asked questions page on our website. But some of the questions that we got were about whether eligible projects have to address multiple climate risks. And you know, the answer to that is we want the most prioritize climate risk to be addressed through projects. We want to incentivize multiple climate risks to be addressed, but they don't necessarily have to address multiple climate risks. We are also asked to clarify some of the language that we had about regions. So we clarified that we have a goal, to using the California Climate Adaptation Strategy regions to ensure geographic diversity, but that is to the extent in which we're using those regions. They are only mostly for internal use to track geographic diversity, and we are aiming to fund one per region. We had another question about how if a project could span multiple of those regions that we have for internal tracking. And yes, whatever region works for your project, whatever geographic scope for climate risks, whatever geographic representation that takes, we just want whatever works for you. And then we also had some clarification questions around our set-asides for tribal entities. So we do have a 10% overall set aside for projects that support tribal entities, but we also have a goal within our planning funds to establish a tribal collaborative, which is a goal within our planning fund. So we both have the overall 10% percentage as well as a singular project goal. And I think beyond that, the final question that I'll cover is for folks that are in positions where they're not sure if they should be applying for planning or implementation funds. And so a example of that is somebody who is very close to closing out a planning project where some planning activities are needed, but some near-term implementation activities can take place. So we're taking that into consideration and will clarify those sorts of issues within the final guidelines. And I'll go ahead and close out that there.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you for all of that feedback. Really helpful to let us know what we need to clarify within the guidelines. So really appreciate that. Jess, are you able to resume our slide deck to cover next steps, please? Great, so we're almost there. I believe it's slide 25 on my end. Great. So now that you've learned more about the draft guidelines and had the opportunity to comment on this workshop, we encourage you to review the draft guidelines in full, where you can find additional information, and we'll drop that link in the chat. We also encourage you to attend sessions for your region, as Kate was mentioning earlier, and that will be a great opportunity for you to see what other entities in your region are interested in the program, discuss region or community-specific comments, and shed light on potential opportunities for collaboration. I don't think we're on the right slide there. If we go to slide.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Am I too far?
Sorry
Sorry
we
about
are
that.
on close to the end on slide 26, other relevant grant opportunities. In the meantime, I see Marissa, I think you have your hand up. Do you have a quick question?
Yes, thank you. I do. I dropped it in the chat, but the last presenter just mentioned something about a tribal collaborative. Can you describe that? I'm curious to know what was intended by that.
So we want to encourage regional partnerships through this program. And through our planning dollars, we understand that some of those collaboratives or partnerships are in development phases. And so we want to ensure that our program can support the creation of a new tribal collaborative. And we don't have a definition of a collaborative within our guidelines that I'm aware of. Maybe Lauren can correct me if I'm wrong, but that is something that we could clarify if that would be helpful, Marissa.
Yeah, I don't know if you meant if that's as that eligible applicants that are tribal collaboratives are prioritized, if that's what you're implying, or if the state is going to have money for a tribal, is going to be coordinating a tribal collaborative. I'm confused.
know that this would be a collaborative led by, for example, tribal governments, the tribal organizations, across a determined region within that project
I see.
application.
I see.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let me jump back in. Apologies for that. Let's jump back into the presentation. So other opportunities here, we've compiled a list of other relevant grant opportunities. I know these have come up in our breakout sessions. We will share a copy of the slides with you so you can learn more about the other programs. And this isn't an exhaustive list. There are many funding opportunities for adaptation and resilience work right now, as you all know. And we hope that this grant program, we hope that if this grant program isn't a good fit for you or your project, you can find funding through one of the other many opportunities. We'll include that within our material post-workshop. Next slide, please. Great. We'd also like to quickly touch on other related opportunities offered by ICARP. We encourage you to review the Adaptation Planning Grant Program guidelines and solicitation, which were recently released, and you can find the link to their website in the chat as well. The applications for that program are due end of March. And our team's California 5th Climate Change Assessment Program is also working with the California Energy Commission on the Tribal Research Grant Program. We encourage you to review those guidelines and submit public comments by February 1st. So that's just around the corner. We'll be dropping links to that opportunity as well within the chat. And finally, the climate services team at ICARP produces meaningful and supportive materials for folks doing resilience work. Check out the Adaptation Clearinghouse and CalAdapt for useful resources to carry out your work or develop project ideas as well. And as we mentioned, we encourage you to sign up for the ICARP listserv that will provide updates on all ICARP programs overall. And links for all of these resources can be found in the chat. Next slide, please. Finally, we'd like to share our frequently asked questions page on our website. This is a one-stop shop for the most distilled information about the Regional Resilience Grant Program guidelines. And this will be a live page that will update regularly throughout the public comment period and application period. And the link to those, to that page will be in the chat as well. Next slide, please. Great. Well, we want to thank you all for your participation and joining this workshop. More information about the program, you can visit our website that has all of the information that we've discussed and join our listserv to receive important updates. With that, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.